In the 1920s, whispers spread across Sussex about a case that would shock the nation. The story of Elsie Cameron and Norman Thorne, a tale of love, betrayal, and a farm that hid dark secrets. But before we start, make sure you like and subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. So, get ready as we journey to England. December 5th, 1924, a Friday afternoon in Crowborough, Sussex. Elsie Cameron stepped off the train at the local station. She was 26 years old. She had travelled from Kensal Rise in London to visit her fiancé, Norman Thorne, at his chicken farm. She carried an overnight bag. She expected to stay with him for a planned visit. She never returned home. Norman Thorne was around 24 years old. He lived alone in a wooden hut on his small poultry farm at Blackness, just outside Crowborough. The farm consisted of a few chicken runs and basic equipment. Thorne had established it in 1922 with money borrowed from his father. The venture was not successful. He struggled to make ends meet. The hut where he lived was barely better than the accommodation for his chickens. 5 years earlier, Thorne had been a Sunday school teacher in London. He had met Elsie Cameron at church. She worked as a typist. They became friends. They're more than friends. On Christmas Day, 1922, they became engaged to be married. But the engagement happened largely because Elsie pushed for it. Thorne was not entirely certain he wanted to marry her. Still, he agreed. Elsie visited the farm several times during 1923. She saw how Thorne lived, how little money he made, how hard the work was. But she remained committed to the engagement. She wanted to marry him. She pressed him to set a wedding date. Thorne kept delaying. The problem was that Norman Thorne had met someone else. Elizabeth Caldecott lived in Crowborough. She was younger than Elsie, local, easier to be with. Thorne fell in love with her. He wanted to end his engagement to Elsie and be with Elizabeth instead, but he could not bring himself to tell Elsie the truth. Elsie's family wanted the marriage to happen. They saw it as a way to settle Elsie down, to get her off their hands. Elsie's sister told Thorne that if he broke off the engagement, Elsie would poison herself. The pressure mounted. Thorne felt trapped. Elsie had what people at the time called a neurotic temperament. She was excitable, emotional, difficult to handle. She became fixated on the idea that she was pregnant, though she was not. She told Thorne she was carrying his child, hoping it would force him to marry her. The lie only made things worse. Thorne tried a different approach. He wrote letters to Elsie hinting at his affair with Elizabeth. He hoped Elsie would be the one to end the engagement. She did not. Instead, on Friday, December 5th, 1924, she arrived at his farm unexpectedly. Witnesses saw Elsie Cameron in Crowborough that afternoon. They saw her walking toward Thorne's farm. She was carrying her overnight bag. Several people recognized her. She reached the farm around tea time. Thorne was there, having his meal. What happened next, only Norman Thorne could say, and his account would change everything. Elsie did not return to London. By Sunday, December 7th, her father grew worried. He sent a telegram to Thorne, asking where Elsie was. Thorne replied that she had not arrived at the farm. He claimed he had been waiting for her, but she never showed up. He said he had written to her, asking why she had not come. On December 10th, Elsie's father contacted police. They began investigating her disappearance. Detectives spoke to witnesses. Multiple people confirmed they had seen Elsie in Crowborough on December 5th. They had seen her walking toward Thorne's farm. The police questioned Thorne. He insisted Elsie never arrived. The investigation continued through Christmas. On Boxing Day, detectives interviewed Thorne again. He made a statement. Police seemed satisfied, but doubts lingered. Where was Elsie? On January 14, 1925, police arrested Norman Thorne. They searched the chicken farm thoroughly. Officers dug in the grounds, looking for anything that might reveal what happened to Elsie Cameron. They found her overnight bag buried in the potato patch.
Then they dug around the chicken runs. Beneath one of them, buried in a sack, they found human remains. Elsie Cameron's head and legs had been cut off. Her dismembered body had been buried on the farm where Norman Thorne lived. On January 15th, confronted with the discovery, Thorne gave a new statement. He confessed to dismembering Elsie's body, but he claimed she had killed herself.
According to this account, Elsie had arrived at the farm on December 5th while he was having tea. She lay on his bed, saying she had a bad head. He told her he needed to meet Elizabeth Caldecott off a train. Despite Elsie's objections, he left her in the hut and went to the station. He met Elizabeth, carried her suitcase to her home, and stayed chatting at her garden gate until 11:30 at night. When he returned to his hut, he said, he found Elsie hanging from a beam by a piece of cord like washing line. He cut the cord and laid her on the bed. She was dead. She had taken off her dress. Her hair was down. He panicked. He laid her across the table for about an hour, not knowing what to do. Then, according to his confession, he decided to hide what had happened. He tore off Elsie's clothes and burned them in the fireplace. He laid her on the floor and sawed off her legs and head by the glow of the fire. He put the body parts in sacks and buried them in the chicken run. He buried her suitcase in the potato patch. Then he tried to cover his tracks. He wrote letters to Elsie as if she was still alive. He sent one that began, "My own darling Elsie," and continued, "Where did you get to yesterday? I suppose you were detained for some reason or other." He pretended to be confused about her whereabouts. He even visited Crowborough police station before her father's telegram arrived, asking if anything had been heard of Elsie. Police did not believe the suicide story. They charged Norman Thorne with murder. The case drew enormous public attention. The trial opened at Lewis Assizes on March 11, 1925. Mr. Justice Finlay presided. The prosecution was led by Sir Henry Curtis Bennett. The defense was led by J.D. Castles. During the investigation, police had found newspaper cuttings in Thorne's hut. The articles were about a murder that had occurred on April 15, 1924, on a Sussex beach. It was one of the so-called Crumbles murders. In that case, the body had been dismembered and buried. Prosecutors argued that finding these cuttings showed Thorne had been planning Elsie's murder. He had read about dismemberment and burial. He had learned from another killer's method. The trial became a battle of medical experts. The defense claimed that Elsie had hanged herself, and Thorne had concealed the death in panic. The prosecution argued she had been beaten to death. The key witness was Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office pathologist. Spilsbury was the most famous forensic expert in Britain. His courtroom appearances were legendary. Juries trusted him absolutely. His word could convict or acquit. Spilsbury had examined Elsie's remains when they were exhumed. He was the only qualified medical professional present at that examination. After he completed his work, the remains were not properly preserved. They were placed in an improperly sealed coffin where they continued to decompose for 4 weeks before the defense could arrange their own examination. By then, the body was severely deteriorated. Spilsbury testified that Elsie had not hanged herself. He examined the beam in Thorne's hut where the rope was supposedly tied. He said the dust on top of the beam had not been disturbed. If a rope had been tied there, it would have left marks. It would have disturbed the dust. There were no such signs.
He also testified that Elsie's body showed injuries inflicted before her death. He believed she had been beaten, probably with an Indian club found at the farm. The injuries, he said, were consistent with being struck by a blunt instrument. She had died from shock caused by those blows, not from hanging. The defense brought their own pathologist. He claimed the marks on Elsie's neck were not natural creases. They had been caused by a rope. The bruises on her body, he argued, had been inflicted when Thorne cut her down from the beam, not before she died. But Spilsbury's reputation carried the day. The jury believed him over the defense expert. His evidence at the trial was characteristically definite, delivered with absolute certainty. The judge's summing up was clearly in favor of Spilsbury's testimony. There were irregularities in the case. Spilsbury's statements at trial contradicted some things he had said earlier at the inquest, but he was not challenged on these contradictions. The jury trusted Sir Bernard Spilsbury. They believed what he told them. The jury retired to consider their verdict. They returned after just 20 minutes. Guilty. Mr. Justice Finlay sentenced Norman Thorne to death by hanging. The courtroom sat in silence as the sentence was pronounced. Thorne maintained his innocence. He insisted Elsie had killed herself, and he had only hidden her body out of panic. An appeal was lodged in March 1925. It was dismissed the following month. The conviction stood. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, lived in Crowborough. He took an interest in the case. He believed the trial had not proved beyond reasonable doubt that Thorne had killed or meant to kill Elsie Cameron. He thought the evidence was insufficient for conviction. He was not alone. Many people expressed doubts. The influential law journal wrote about the case, expressing profound disquiet at the verdict. They noted the more than papal infallibility with which Sir Bernard Spilsbury is rapidly being invested by juries. But doubts were not enough to stop the execution. On April 22, 1925, Norman Thorne was hanged at Wandsworth Prison in London. The date was Elsie Cameron's 27th birthday. She had been born on April 22, 1898. She would have turned 27 that day. Instead, the man accused of murdering her was executed. Before his death, Thorne wrote letters to his family. He continued to maintain his innocence. He swore Elsie had hanged herself. His father believed him and tried to have the letters published. The authorities blocked them. Thorne went to the gallows swearing he had not murdered Elsie Cameron. The case remained controversial for decades. In 2019, a BBC investigative program called Murder, Mystery and My Family re-examined the evidence. 2 barristers and a judge reviewed all the facts. The judge declared his belief that the conviction was safe. He believed Norman Thorne had indeed murdered Elsie Cameron, but others continued to disagree. The case became known as an example of what critics called Spilsburyism, the idea that juries were too willing to accept Sir Bernard Spilsbury's testimony without question, that his reputation overshadowed proper examination of evidence, that his certainty influenced verdicts even when doubt should have remained. Norman Thorne became known in some circles as a martyr to Spilsburyism. Whether he was truly guilty or wrongly convicted remains debated. In his final words to his father before execution, Thorne expressed his frustration at being convicted largely on the strength of Spilsbury's testimony, rather than clear proof. Elsie Cameron was 26 years old when she died. She had been engaged to Norman Thorne for nearly 2 years. She had visited his farm multiple times. She had pressed him to set a wedding date. On December 5, 1924, she travelled to Crowborough to see him. What exactly happened in that wooden hut on the chicken farm will never be fully known. Did Norman Thorne murder her in cold blood to escape an unwanted marriage? Did he strike her in anger during an argument, causing injuries that led to her death? Or did Elsie, unstable and desperate, truly hang herself, leaving Thorne to panic and make the terrible decision to hide her death by dismembering her body? The jury said murder. Sir Bernard Spilsbury said murder. The judge said murder. Norman Thorne said suicide. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle said reasonable doubt. Legal scholars said questionable conviction. What is certain is that Elsie Cameron's dismembered body was found buried beneath a chicken run on Norman Thorne's farm. What is certain is that Thorne cut off her head and legs, buried her remains, burned her clothes, and lied about her whereabouts for weeks.
What is certain is that she came to his farm alive on December 5th and was found dead beneath the ground 6 weeks later. The chicken farm murder became one of the most famous cases of the 1920s. It raised questions about forensic evidence, about the power of expert witnesses, about how much weight juries should give to professional reputation versus actual proof. It showed the dangers of relying too heavily on a single expert, no matter how distinguished. Elsie Cameron went to Crowborough expecting to discuss wedding plans with her fiancé. She ended up buried in pieces beneath her chicken run. Norman Thorne went to the gallows maintaining his innocence. The truth of what happened in that hut on December 5, 1924, died with both of them.